Thank you, Bob, for being here. I've known you a long time, and I'm very grateful that you agreed to interview for Integrity in Healthcare is what we're calling this series.
Hmm.
And today we're going to talk about change, and I'm sure change is something that is kind of an overarching theme in your line of business, which is counseling
Hmm.
with your clients. So if we could just pause and ask that question, Bob, who experiences change?
So every human being on the planet will experience change. Uh, when you think about it, we are in seasons. Our whole planet is changing. So we have 4 seasons, except in Florida, we have two.
Yeah.
I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. You are not the same person you were 5 years ago. We
Yeah.
change. So the problem with change is we tend to resist it because it's uncomfortable. We
Mm.
don't know what the next step is sometimes.
What does change involve?
I think one of the most significant things of change is the fact that it's related to grief. There are stages, the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross
Yes.
5 stages of grief
Stages
most
of grief.
people are familiar with. It starts with denial.
Okay.
That's usually in a shock stage. And then it moves toward anger.
Okay.
And then after anger, um, and it can go back and forth, but normally there's a bargaining kind of movement in a
Mm-hmm.
person's thought process.
Okay.
By the way, those three things, the denial, the anger, and the bargaining, allow us not to feel the deep pain that an experience might be affording us.
What does that look like with a person who's grieving?
In, a, in the context of care, particularly elder care, um, a son or a daughter,
Mm-hmm.
or if it's a spouse,
Okay.
they may feel, if I get them into the right place,
Oh,
maybe they'll have just what they need to change and I can get them back.
okay.
So it's not going to be a forever thing. That
Okay.
would be a bargaining kind of thought. There are two more.
Okay.
Those three keep us safe in a sense from the deep hurt.
Okay.
The next one does the opposite. It engulfs us in pain,
Okay.
and that's the one that we're dealing with depression. The depression happens if we're not dealing, especially with the anger,
Mm-hmm.
because the next step out would be actually internalizing that anger, which would then be sadness.
Okay.
Depression is really about feelings of profound sadness and hopelessness.
Is that why it's a part of change? Like, why is depression such a part of change? When.
If you can imagine a target,
Mm-hmm.
let's call it an archery target. So
Okay.
there's a bullseye, and there
Yes.
are three rungs or rings around the bullseye.
Okay.
That last ring would be depression.
Okay.
Okay, let's call that depression. What's pushing that depression is the ring next closer to the bullseye, which would be anger or frustration.
Okay.
What's pushing the anger and frustration, which is the closest ring to the bullseye, would be a fear or anxiety or
Okay.
a hurt feeling.
Okay.
And then the bullseye itself is really the core of the problem, which would be either guilt or shame. So if you're going backwards with that, a lot of times people that are having to make tough decisions about a spouse or mom or dad, and this is one of the harder ones,
Okay.
is they'll feel either that they're doing something wrong or that they are wrong. They're not. I should be able, or I should do something else.
Okay.
If it's guilt,
Yeah.
then that's appropriate because then there's an action that's attached to actions or behaviors,
Okay.
and guilt would be felt if you are doing something wrong,
Right.
right? So if you're abusing someone who's an elderly person or something like that, you ought to feel guilty.
You're right.
The shame is different. The shame attacks the person about who they are. Let's say grandma says, "Oh, you'll appreciate me when I'm gone."
Oh. Okay.
There's enough shame in that,
Yeah.
just to kind of let the person think, well, is there something wrong with my decision?
Yes.
that kind of thing. And that would be a pretty typical scenario, I think.
I do see that in healthcare. I see that with families. All of these that you mentioned, denial and anger, bargaining, depression. But there's five. There's one more.
Well,
And what would
the
that
last one would
be?
be acceptance,
Okay.
right?
Yep.
And to get to acceptance, you have to go through the hurt. If we keep
Okay.
the hurt inside, it'll always stay there, and it'll show up in other kinds of pathology, relationship problems, anger problems. It could even be physiological problems like that.
And of these five stages,
Right?
do they go one, two, three? Can they bounce back and
They
forth?
can bounce back and forth. With the target, though, that I was explaining,
Hmm.
it really does move from one to the other.
Okay.
So if let's go with the shame. So it's not guilt. I haven't done anything wrong, but grandma is speaking words to me that are bringing up shame kinds of things. I don't want to deal with the shame. So I cover that over with, in this case, it would probably be hurt feelings.
Mm.
But if I don't want to deal with the hurt, then I'm covering that over with the frustration or the anger.
Okay.
If I feel it's wrong to be angry in that setting, I might even jump that, internalize the anger, and then I'm back at depression.
Are there other feelings that can be evoked when you're experiencing change?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There are, I don't know how many feelings there are. I have seen pages of hundreds of feelings words, books of them. Every human being has a makeup of feeling.
Hmm.
That's in our DNA. We're feeling people. We're people of emotion.
Is that when you go to a counselor's office or even a doctor's office and they have the chart on the wall with
Yeah,
all the different feelings and they say,
yeah,
can you identify with one of these?
yeah.
So are you saying any of those feelings can be evoked when we're experiencing change?
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely.
When would be the best time to talk about change?
Whenever there's somebody there to listen,
Okay.
it should be a safe place, though. Not everybody will understand another person's story. Uh, they could be made fun of. They could be told, hey, it's been 6 months. Why don't you get over it? Things like that. And the grief process would change,
Okay. Right.
change, loss. So whenever there's change, there's a sense of loss, right?
Yes.
And then when there's loss, there's a grief process. So that's where we're coming from.
Yeah.
So there's no time on that.
One thing about loss, I think a lot of us consider loss being that finality.
Hmm.
There's, our mom and dad are, declining in their health, whether cognitively or physically, and we know the end is near, and they might go on hospice, um, and they pass away, and that's loss.
Hmm.
But when we're talking about change, um, we're experiencing loss, right? Even if
Absolutely.
they're not passed away.
Absolutely. And the change doesn't have to be a bad thing or what we perceive as something bad. So let's say I move from house A to house B.
Okay.
I'm moving into a house that's nicer, let's say.
Hmm.
So that's a positive thing.
Yeah.
But what am I losing? There's still a sense of loss. I've had maybe years at house A with a lot of memories
Yeah.
or maybe kids or grandkids coming back over. Now they have to adjust to something different as well as I do. So there's loss in any kind of a change.
Talking about all these feelings and the different stages, the feelings that they evoke, um, why is it that feelings are such an important part of change?
They're important because every feeling has a need embedded in it.
Okay.
And if we don't know what we're feeling, we then will not often know what we actually need.
And so really there is more than a feeling. To cliche, there's more than a feeling. There really is more than just
Right,
the feeling.
right. I often like to say that they're just feelings
Okay.
because the reason for the feeling is to alert us of needs.
Who can we talk to try and help us discover what those needs are? Because it seems kind of complex. We know what
Mm-hmm.
we're feeling, and we might be able to identify that feeling, but
Mm-hmm.
how would we know how to find the need behind the feeling?
Sometimes that can be difficult. Take a positive, what we perceive as a positive feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Ecstatic is
Okay.
a positive feeling.
Yes.
What's the need embedded in that? Somebody says, well, I'm not sure what that is. You'd have to go back to the situation
Okay.
right?
How can one find out what they need? Is it to go to a counselor like you?
Mm,
Is just to explore and have conversation and go
right.
deeper with it?
Yeah, I would say you can go to anybody with that who are safe people. Safe people are going to be people who are open and honest, that have integrity, that will hold confidentiality.
Okay.
So you can talk to them about anything. So same like with places where we could talk about it,
Yeah.
or in situations, it's the same thing. It needs to be safe.
Okay.
But that can be a counselor, that could be a pastor, it could be a rabbi,
Okay.
um, it could be a friend,
Okay.
anyone who really can demonstrate that empathy with you in it.
Okay. So it could be a friend or family. It doesn't have to be necessarily professional.
Does not have to be. Okay.
Feeling, because I see this in healthcare. I see the kids. I experienced this myself and the loss of my parents. That anger does come up.
Hmm.
Is there something specific behind that feeling of just angry?
The anger is being pushed by something. Anger is a secondary feeling.
Okay.
So they ask the question, what is moving me to anger? What is pushing that anger in me?
Okay.
And normally, and let's say in a setting where we're making a decision that'll affect mom or dad, or
Yeah.
husband or wife, uh, that would be probably anxious,
Okay.
anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
has fear in it, the
Yeah.
unknown. Will we be able to do this? Will they acclimate to the new setting, and
Yes.
how well will that happen? So it's usually anxiety or fear in that setting.
I think within healthcare, and they're making these decisions that are life-changing decisions, the unknown is huge
Hmm.
to them, because I think we can both agree healthcare in general has become so complicated and so difficult to understand that, yeah, anxiety is something I see quite often,
Hmm.
and fear, because they don't know what's
Hmm.
next, and they start asking questions that there's really no answer to.
Right.
Um,
And so if we go back to the feeling having a need embedded in it, if I'm feeling anxious in that setting, what do I need? It might be that I need more information.
when we come in and meet with a family, for example,
Hmm.
I do notice that level does come down a little bit the more we educate them on
Hmm.
all their options, all the resources, and potential outcomes, whether
Hmm.
they be, good or
Hmm.
are going to create some sadness.
Well, you're a support for them at that point. And one of the things that's helped me in making decisions where there didn't appear to be any particularly good decision is a worksheet that I use called the double bind. The double bind would be a worksheet that would have 5 columns, horizontal columns.
Okay.
And the first one would be if a description of the problem or the situation. Let's take one about placing grandma
Okay.
in a caregiving setting. If I do that, so
Hmm.
this would be the second column over.
Okay.
So it's placing grandma as the situation. First column over is if I do that, what is the worst that could happen? Worst that could happen would be she doesn't connect with anybody or
Doesn't acclimate very well.
doesn't acclimate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then the third one over is if I don't place her, what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
So
Great
then
question.
it's like, all right, well, what if she has a medical emergency or something at my house
Yeah.
that I'm not prepared for?
Yeah.
Then I'm putting her life in jeopardy. The fourth column is really where the rubber meets the road here, because it
Okay.
asks the question, is there a right thing to do? And that's where we can get unstuck.
Okay.
Now, that being said, the right thing is not always the easiest thing.
Right. Right.
In fact, it often isn't easy.
Yeah.
So, but if I'm willing then, or a family is willing to do what the right thing is, then the fifth column is the plan on how to carry it out in the best way possible.
Okay.
So that's the double bind worksheet.
Is there anywhere in healthcare and working with families and everything where the question, would you rather be right or be in relationship?
Hmm.
Does that ever play a role? Would that be an appropriate question in visiting with families?
Wow, that's a hard one here, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because the right thing might look like you're breaking relationship,
Mm-hmm.
but that would be a misnomer
Okay.
because a healthy relationship requires healthy interaction,
Right.
the best for one another. And if one person can't make the decision on the best themselves and the family's made put in that setting,
Yeah.
that's the hard decision that needs to be made.
What's going to look like a healthy relationship in this during this type of change? What's a healthy relationship?
Starting with the best interest of the person of concern, and then following through with that to stay connected
Okay.
in the healthiest way possible.
Well, Bob, thank you so much. I
You're
appreciate you
welcome,
spending your
Charles.
time with me and talking about this. Is very important, and look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bob.